It's time to chill out and get ready for a mediocre Q&A live stream. If you're old enough, grab yourself your favorite adult beverage, and if you're not, stick with apple juice. Put your feet up and relax. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And now let's cue up the intro music. Hello. How is everybody doing today? I'm doing pretty good here. Just hanging out. A little like chaotic at my house. You don't realize how good you have it until your family leaves for just a couple hours. My family's, my kids, my wife and my kids went off and did something today. And so I got home and we've got dogs. So I had to like let the dogs out and, all that stuff. Right. Okay. I'm sure there's a funny pun in there, but, it's kind of funny. It's like having to babysit your own kids. You don't realize how much work your wife does until she leaves, and then you're like, "How do I do this?" Like, and it's just dogs that I'm having to deal with, but it's a bit crazy. So, if I have to get up and run out of here, it's because my dogs have done something horrible in the other room and I have to go solve that problem. Oh man, we are so fortunate to have significant others. If you guys do, I'm so fortunate. My wife does so much, and I don't think I give her enough credit because something as simple as her leaving for a couple hours, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? What? Wait, all these things you have to do, but it's kind of crazy. Hello to everybody in the chat. I see lots of great people in here. So, am I a Baja man? As in like racing? Not really. I don't know if that's what you mean by that, Will. Let me see. Or are you talking about the song? but that's not Baja, man. Anyways, I don't know, whatever. I'm distracted. Let me know in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. So got a couple things I want to talk about in the stream as usual. If you guys have any questions or anything you guys want me to cover, feel free to throw it into the chat. Just do me a favor and put it in caps lock. That way, okay, Baja Man made the song. Okay, yeah, I got it. I see what you're saying. Yeah, no. Yeah, feel free to put them in the chat, put them in caps lock. It helps me to see them. Okay. If I miss your questions, feel free to shoot me an email to hvacrvideos@gmail.com. And Will, thank you very much for continuing to be a supporter of the channel. Will Speed is a good friend of mine. He's in the chat right now. So if you guys are watching this after the fact, if you guys don't know, there is an entire live chat. Now, this is also streaming on several Facebook places, like on my page and my profile, and I think it's streaming in the HVAC Overtime Facebook group, and then it's streaming on LinkedIn. It's streaming on YouTube. So there's an entire chat going on that oftentimes most of you probably won't see, especially in the replay, and you guys are missing out because there's a whole community within the chat. Oftentimes there's other people helping other people, like I'm answering people's questions and then people in the chat are answering people's questions. So you definitely want to try, if you can, to tune into a live event, because it really is a great community and there's a good group of people that are constantly in here. Okay. So thank you very much. For those that are curious who I am, you may be popping this up on your social media for the first time or anything. My name is Chris, and I'm an HVACR service technician here in Southern California. I started making videos on YouTube about 5 years ago now, I think, maybe 6. I don't know. November of 2017. So whatever that is, someone can do the math. It was a long time ago, but I started making videos for my employees, and then it just slowly turned into this thing that it's become. And I do these Q&A live streams to kind of consolidate the questions. So, when I upload videos, I typically do 2 videos a week and 1 live stream a week. And when I do, there's naturally a lot of questions or comments. And I'm also completely open to feedback. If you watch one of my videos and you have some criticism to give me, I'm 100% willing to take criticism. If you guys have advice in ways that I can better myself, I'm always looking for that advice. Just be courteous about it, right? But no, I'm always looking for feedback, good, bad, whatever it may be, because if you have something or you can educate me, then it's an opportunity for me to learn. I'm always looking to learn. Okay. That's something that as I've gotten older, and I'm sure there's some people in the chat that can agree with me, but as I've gotten older, I actually look forward to being incorrect, as weird as it sounds. Once I learn to let go of my ego and let go of my, in a sense, pride, but pride isn't the right word. I'd say more ego. Once I've learned to let go of my ego, I'm now an open book, and I love being proven wrong, because then I get to learn a new thing. And I love learning. I really do. It's a very great thing. And I also encourage everybody out there to share their knowledge. Okay. There's this old adage that if you shared your knowledge, you would no longer be needed and you would be replaced. If that was ever true, which I still don't even know if it was, but if that was ever true, it's not the case now. Okay. If you are a good technician, if you are competent, you're kind, you're courteous, and you're productive, you will be employed for the rest of the foreseeable future, no matter how much of your knowledge you share. Okay. So I encourage everybody out there to share the knowledge. When none of us have it all, but if we communicate and share it with each other, there's potential that we can help the next guy. So I get a great dopamine rush when I get emails or comments or anything like that that say something that I shared helped someone else. That is a great feeling. And I encourage you guys all to try to experience that by sharing something and getting the gratitude and getting the thank yous from the people that you shared that knowledge with. Okay. All right, let's see what else we got going on in the chat right now. Wink HVAC, thank you very much for that super chat. And hello from California. Wink says he is from Connecticut. So right on, man. All right, let's see. Will Speed says being wrong means you learn something. 100%. I love that. Let's see. Jason Johnson says, oh, okay, so he's answering someone's question. Okay, so again, there's great things going on in the chat right now. Reading through here. All right, cool. Lots of great people. So the good guy says he has a true reach-in freezer, not temping. Suction pressure is 40 PSIG. System had saddle taps added to the suction only. Okay, So yeah, you need to see both sides of the system. You need to see the high side pressure and the low side pressure to tell you anything. You're not going to be able to do it with just the low side pressure. So, and get rid of saddle taps. Saddle taps are junk. I'm assuming you're talking about the mechanical fittings that you tighten on with an Allen wrench. Those things are junk and they leak. So you want to take those out if that's what you're talking about. You want to weld something in there that's permanent with pressure ports, and then make sure the unit is completely defrosted. Make sure the evaporator's clean, the drain's clear, make sure the condenser's clean. Operate the box with no food in it. Keep the doors shut and monitor it and see what happens. Okay. Get lots of temperatures, temperature of the air going into the condenser, temperature of the air going into the evaporator, and just monitor the box, and you will learn a lot more about the unit, but you're not going to find out anything with just a suction pressure port. It's not going to do it for you. All right, let's see what else we got going on in the chat. If I missed your stuff, again, either repeat it, put it in caps lock again, keep putting it in the chat, and or shoot me an email, hvacrvideos@gmail.com. All right, I'm scrolling down right now to see what I'm missing in here. What's my biggest HVAC mistake that turned into a learning experience? You know, sometimes these questions are hard to answer on the fly, but right off the top of my head, this wasn't a big mistake. But I can remember the first time that I had to call for help. My dad had to come out and help me, and he was a little irritated because he had to drive about 45 minutes to come help me. And, you know, there was probably a little bit of fault on his side, but also some lack of confidence on my side in the particular situation, because I was brazing an expansion valve into a system. So I had a failed expansion valve. And this is one of the old, I think they were, I don't know who made it, but it was a peanut expansion valve. Okay. We called them a peanut expansion valve because they were tiny and they were little stainless steel expansion valves. And not being confident in my brazing abilities and being worried about ruining an expansion valve, for the life of me, I could not get the silver solder to flow across the expansion valve connection points, right? Where the copper was being brazed to the stainless steel valve. I was so afraid of overheating the valve that I wouldn't get it hot enough to allow the silver solder to flow into the valve joint to seal it up. And that was a learning experience. I remember when my dad came out, you know, he was, you know, irritated, but then when he got there, he's like, all right, here's the deal. You know, you got to put flux on the joint. You got to make sure it's clean, and you got to get it hot. And the interesting thing that I learned that day was silver solder, or, you know, yeah, silver solder. We use 56%, by the way. So we use a high silver content, but, you know, once that solder starts to flow, it acts like plumbing solder, like tin solder. It just flows all the way around, but you just got to get it hot enough. And that's always an uncomfortable situation when you're learning how to braze, because you're so hyper aware of that expansion valve getting overheated. And on a peanut valve, little tiny one, there's nothing there to cool off with a wet towel. You can't do that. And, you know, that's something that I get quite often when people are talking and they're like, how come, like, for instance, I recorded a video today. It's not uploaded or anything yet, but I can guarantee you that I'm going to get comments. How come I didn't protect the filter dryer with a wet towel, or using a heat blocking compound like the Hvacr wet rag, or, you know, whatever, you know, a cooling gel or something? Like, how come I didn't protect the dryer? Sometimes, especially when you're working on small stuff, there's not much you can do. Okay. And if you try to use a wet towel, oftentimes, right, what'll actually happen is the towel will get so hot that the steam will start rising off the towel, and it'll actually affect your braze joint. And I know this is hard for people to understand, but when you're working in tiny little areas and you're trying to braze something really small right there, and you have a wet towel right there, that steam is going to mess up your entire braze joint, and it's not going to allow it to flow correctly. So you have to understand that there's a time and place, and sometimes you can't get out all the fancy stuff. Now, of course, I try to protect my braze joints as much as possible. I try to protect the components, but also sometimes you just got to go hot and heavy, right? Get that torch hot, get in there, get it sealed up, and get out, then cool it off, right? It's just, it is what it is. So I wouldn't call that like a big mistake, but it was definitely a learning moment. I can remember that. And I still remember the feeling, the awkwardness and everything. And then once I saw my dad do it, I was like, really? Like, literally just held it on there for about 4 seconds more than I was willing to do so. And the solder just sucked right into the joint, you know? So sometimes, and so, you know, another thing too, is that I have tailored the way that I mentor people and teach people to the style that I needed when I was being brought up in the trade. Now, unfortunately, you know, my dad's not perfect. My college professors weren't perfect. The senior mechanic at my company wasn't perfect. Not everybody had one perfect way to teach me. It was a mixture of everything. But for me, I'm the kind of person that, you know, you show me how to do it once or twice and we're good to go. Okay. So I take that approach with my apprentices, is that I make sure that they have an extended amount of time, usually about a year. Most of the time, about a year is the minimum apprenticeship time. And then from that point forward, I start releasing them a little bit at a time, only on jobs that I know they can handle. You know, I came up a different way, and I know there's a lot of people out there. Maybe you guys in the chat right now can comment if you guys came up this way, but I came up the way where I just had to figure it out. And there was some frustrating things about that I really didn't care. Now, granted, I learned some valuable lessons, but I'm trying to make it a little bit easier for the future guys that come to work for me. So I'm curious in the chat, are you guys the throw them to the wolves and see if they can survive, or are you guys the more slow mentorship approach? Like, which way do you prefer to train people, and how were you trained? Were you thrown to the wolves, or did you go through a proper apprenticeship? Michael Metzger, thank you very much for that super chat. That is very, very awesome. I really do appreciate it. Again, thanks, bud. Really, really cool. All right. Let's see what else we got going on in here. I'm reading through the chat right now. Do I have a video on how to bypass an economizer for a train and a York RTU for spring checkups? Stephen Covington, no, I do not, my friend. I apologize, and that's not really something I can tell you how to do right here. So you can, I'm sure maybe someone in the chat. Yeah, it also depends on what type of economizer it is too. Is it a Jade economizer, or is it an older Honeywell 7200? I'm trying to remember the numbers. It's been a while. What I will say, hold on. I would highly encourage you to download this manual. This is the Honeywell Technical Reference Manual, Design and Application Guide for Honeywell Economizer Controls. Now, everybody out there, you guys, if you can get a print version of this, do it, okay? It's an awesome book. But if you open this up, this goes through legacy controls all the way back, old school controls in here. The black modules, I mean, it goes through everything, and it gives you wiring diagrams, really does a great job of explaining, going through the new controllers. This is a great book. I highly encourage you to get this. This will help you on a good majority of equipment out there. So the Honeywell Technical Reference Manual, Design and Application Guide for Honeywell Economizer Controls. Very good book to have. All right, reading through the chat. Let's see. Mario Jr. says the Wolves got the best of him. Cool. So let's see. Jason Johnson says he was thrown to the Wolves. Wasn't his favorite, but it made him learn quick. See, a lot of people went to the Wolves. Micah, do I love being a technician? That is actually my favorite thing about my job. I also run a business, and when I get stressed out, when I'm just overwhelmed with everything, because the business can be frustrating and different things, I get relaxed when I just go out and do service calls. So yes, I love being a technician. I love fixing things. I just am not in love with running the business, but of course I appreciate the business. It's just kind of a love-hate relationship you have. Let's see. Oh, wow. So very interesting. A lot of people were thrown to the Wolves, sink or swim. Yeah. Very cool. I mean, not very cool, but you know, it's kind of one of those things. I'm reading through the chat right now, and I'm reading about this question. Steve is saying Honeywell Jade. So I don't know if the original problem was on a Honeywell Jade controller, or if someone else, or if it's another controller in there. The Honeywell Jades are not that hard to bypass. They really aren't. You could do it with a couple of jumper wires. So Trey says he was put out there to figure it out, but you teach slow. You can usually listen to the customer and know if it's a call you should go to. Yeah, that's a good idea. I will oftentimes listen to service calls as they come in, and I will think about them before I send certain technicians out. Now, of course, I want every single technician to be as confident in the type of work that I do as myself. Not saying that I know everything, but I'm pretty confident in the type of equipment that I work on because I'm very familiar with it. Now, of course, I want every technician to be as confident as me, but I'm going to be very careful about who I send out because we also have to worry about reputation. So it's not just about my technician learning. It's also about finding a balance between getting the equipment fixed as soon as possible so that way the customer is satisfied with the repair. You know, of course, in a perfect world, I would love to continue sending the service technician A out to the call that gets callbacks on the first thing that he tried to fix, right? So let's say he goes out and tries to fix something, an ice machine, and it works for a little bit, but then it stops working again. Well, in a perfect world, I want to send technician A back until he gets it completely figured out. But that's also problematic because then the customer starts to lose confidence in them. On the flip side, it's also problematic if every time technician A goes out and tries to fix something that there's a callback that I go out and save the day. That's a problem too, because then that makes the customer only want me to go out there. So it's definitely a balance, finding a balance there between letting a technician go on his own callbacks, but then also saying, hey, all right, this is getting a little, bad, so I need to go take care of it. So usually what I do is I usually give him about 1 to 2 calls. So if a technician has an issue, we try to fix it and it doesn't fix it and we get a call back, I'll usually let them run the call back. But if there's another call after that, then I'm going out there because we need to get to the bottom of this. And usually I'll take the technician with me depending on the situation, and then we'll go through it together and we'll try to figure it out. But there's a very, very important lesson here. If you are thorough and you document everything and you give the customer options, oftentimes it's a way for you to get out of a callback. And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to make it seem like we're going to go in there and talk them out of something, right? But if you thoroughly go through the equipment and you're reading through everything and you're documenting everything and you're telling the customer, look, here's the main problem, but here's some other issues that I see too, and I'm a little concerned about them. I'd love to dig in further, but it's going to cost a little bit more than the quoted amount because there's obviously other things going on. What it does is it gives you an out. So that way, if there is a callback, then if the customer denied fixing those other things, well, it's not really a callback because you get where I'm going with that. So it's all about just understanding the relationship and communicating properly with the customer is a really important thing too. All right, reading through the chat. So I know I'm missing a lot of stuff. So again, feel free to put it in there. And again, I know there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm not going to get to. Okay. So if I miss your questions, feel free to shoot an email. Trey says he tries to give the text 3 tries before you send someone else or yourself. Yeah. And it's that fine line of, I'm usually like the second call back. It's like, okay, yeah, it's time for me to go back out there. But it just depends, it depends. All right. Take as much time. Oh, okay. Yeah. So Will Speed is telling Info Warrior to take as much time off as he needs because burnout is real. Burnout is real. So it's a matter of finding a balance between work and your personal life. You got to find a happy balance there. All right. Jason saying that he's burnt out from last week and finally accepted you're not young anymore. You and me both, my friend. You and me both. I'm starting to get this. My wife says it's carpal tunnel in my left wrist where it just on the top of right here, it hurts all the time and it hurts in my wrist. And I'm like, what is it from? Because I don't really do a lot with this hand at work. Like, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm as active as I used to be at work. I definitely am not. And yes, sometimes I sit at my computer and I type, but what I actually think it's from is I tend to drive with my hand on the steering wheel and I tend to kind of lock my wrist and get into a comfortable position and drive with one hand on the steering wheel for a good majority of the time. And I think that's what's hurting my hand. But yeah, realizing that you're getting old, that is a real thing because I realize that every single day. It's ridiculous. All right. We're all old. All right. So I'm going to get to some of my things on here. So Keith, in the beginning of this stream, he said something, and Keith, it was very nice of you. Thank you very much. But he said that he's blown away with my knowledge and my work ethic. So the reason why I wanted to address this, Keith, that was very nice of you. I'm very humbled by those words. That's awesome. Okay. But it's interesting because, and I don't, I'm being serious. The knowledge that I have doesn't seem anything special to me. right? If that makes sense. Like, I get it. I get that you guys are watching and people watch my videos and maybe they learn something, but it's hard for me to grasp that concept. So while I don't know if this makes sense. Like, I can understand and appreciate the fact that you're saying something nice to me and I'm thanking you for that. But then at the same time, it's hard for me to accept that praise. I don't know what that is. It's just hard for me to grasp the concept that you appreciate that. Like, I don't know. But again, I'm thankful for it, if any of that makes sense. Mark asked in a recent video, it was one where that I uploaded that I changed an evaporator, 2 compressors, a drain pan on that AC. And Mark said, is it not just cheaper to replace the entire unit? Okay, so here's how this works. I've talked about this before, but when I make a repair to a piece of equipment, I give the customer options. In that particular video, I changed an evaporator coil because it had restricted metering devices. I changed 2 compressors. We put our 22 back in the unit. Like, we did a lot of work on it, right? And it was an expensive repair. I gave the customer a replacement option, okay? In California, it is very difficult to legally replace equipment, okay? But customers, even not legally, right? Not pulling permits is still really expensive. So the repair that I did was probably, 2/3 of the cost of a replacement. And yeah, to me, they should have replaced that package unit. But at the same time, we couldn't get package units at that time. And still to this day, it's difficult. I think I got a quote from Carrier for a 4-ton heat pump, downshot, just a normal package unit, nothing fancy. And they said 6-month wait time for the package unit. So it's hard to get equipment right now. It's hit and miss. Sometimes you can find them, sometimes you can't. So I always give my customers options. I give them repair versus replace quotes, and I let them make the decision. If they choose to do a repair, then so be it. I'm going to go ahead and bill them for my time. And I only warranty my workmanship. I'm not warranting the entire unit, and it is what it is. So my customer made the decision. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time trying to convince them otherwise. I got other jobs to do. So I'm just going to knock it out and be done with it. So, all right. So let's cross that off real quick and look at the chat. Yes. Chris HN is asking me to talk about an automatic pump down system. Let me see. Hold on just one second. Yeah, so an automatic pump down system is something that we do on a refrigeration system to prevent refrigerant migration. Okay. And then also, well, that's the main reason, is to prevent refrigerant migration, prevent flooded starts. What can happen in certain situations is the refrigerant is typically going to be attracted to the coldest place in the system. So sometimes the refrigerant might migrate all the way up to the compressor in the off cycle, or it might migrate all the way down to the evaporator. And oftentimes when it does that, if it migrates up to the compressor, what can actually happen is that refrigerant can mix with the refrigerant oil in the compressor. And then when the compressor starts up, it can wash the oil out of the compressor. They call it a flooded start. And it can wash the oil out of the compressor, which can lead to a compressor failure. So that is one of the main reasons why we will do a refrigeration pump down. So what we will do in a refrigeration system, in a remote refrigeration system, is we will install a liquid line solenoid valve. Sometimes you can do it in air conditioning too, for those same various reasons, okay? But what we'll do is install a liquid line solenoid valve on the liquid line, and then the solenoid valve will turn on and off via a thermostat or a temperature controller. Okay, so that's the main reason why you're typically going to see a pump down system, okay, is to prevent refrigerant migration. So when the system satisfies on temperature, the liquid line solenoid valve closes down, but then the compressor continues to run. Okay. And the compressor continues to run, and the compressor has a storage vessel on the roof called a liquid line receiver. And that liquid line receiver should be designed to store the entire refrigerant charge when the system is pumped down at the liquid line receiver. That's how they should be designed. Doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, but that's the main reason why you would use a pump down system or a pump down circuit or whatever, is to prevent liquid migration. All right, let's see what else we got going on in here. Let me see. New to refrigeration, best advice to techs besides open your ears, mouth, and open your ears, keep your mouth shut kind of a thing, is just be observant. Okay. Be observant and be willing to help, be willing to learn. When you're on the roof, take lots of pictures when you can. And I say that because there's certain job sites that you're not allowed to take pictures on, okay, especially if you work in government facilities and things like that. But just be willing to learn, be very observant. If you see something you don't understand, take a picture of it and do some research on it, okay? As an apprentice, I don't know if you're an apprentice or not, but as an apprentice, don't be afraid to be a gopher, the guy that's going to go back and forth to get parts and materials from the van, because that's an opportunity to learn, okay? There's an opportunity to learn every single day, and you need to do it. And just understand also when to ask questions. The best piece of advice for refrigeration is to start out by getting a book called Commercial Refrigeration for Air Conditioning Technicians by Dick Wurz. Okay, get that book. It will help you to understand some of the fundamentals. And it's not a very big book, and it's a great book to keep in your vehicle, in your work van. So that way, when you're curious about something, you have something to grab. Now, also, we have these really amazing things called smartphones that happen to store lots of information and give us access to all kinds of data. So also, as a technician, one of the very important things you need to understand and learn how to do is how to research things, okay? Now, there is lots of great resources out there. If you need manuals, for different pieces of equipment, there's several manufacturers and companies that consolidate manuals. Blue On is one of them. They consolidate a lot of air conditioning manuals. Partstown does a lot of refrigeration and appliance manuals. But guess what? It's not that hard to find the manuals yourself too. And sometimes Blue On or sometimes Partstown isn't going to have everything. So it's always handy to know how to research that stuff yourself. Carrier, the air conditioning manufacturer, they have some great resources, but you have to know how to find it. If you're doing residential work and things like that, there's special contractor websites to find information from. And while it's not openly shared where to find it, it's not wrong to also find them on yourself, right? So, like if you want to find the contractor side of, I just happen to know this one off the top of my head right now, Arco Air. Arco Air is a carrier brand, right? It's one of the United Technologies brands or whatever company runs the entire, I think it's United Technologies, I think. But Arco Air for residential side, if you want to find the contractor side of their website, go to goarcoair.com. And you'll find the contractor side and you'll find lots of great manuals. So every manufacturer usually has a contractor side of their website. So if you go to carrier.com, that's the customer side, right? That's where the customer is going to go to find out about their information. You may or may not be able to find the contractor side by going to carrier.com. You might have to do some other research and figure it out. So, just understand how to research things online. That's really important. People ask me all the time, where in the heck do I get my manuals that I carry with me, the ice machine manuals and different things? I get them from the manufacturer. Call the manufacturer, say, hey, where can I find these manuals online, or where can I buy them? And they'll tell you. Okay. All right. Let's see what else. I know I'm scrolling past a lot of stuff. So, okay. So James is saying that Chat GPT is quite informative with refrigeration and can dang near answer many questions. He was very surprised. So that's very interesting that you say that, because I was just having a conversation with Chat GPT yesterday. If you guys have been living under a rock and you don't know what Chat GPT is a how do you even explain it? The easiest way to explain it, it's an artificial intelligence, but essentially it's like talking to the internet. Okay. So when you ask Chat GPT questions, what it does is it scours various sources across the internet and finds the answers to your question, but it answers them like it's a real person talking to you. It's kind of scary, to be honest with you. But I was having a conversation with Chat GPT yesterday, just researching some random information about CO2 being used as a refrigerant and R290 being used as a refrigerant. Chat GPT can be great until it's not, okay? Because what I tend to notice is it does a really good job of answering questions until it doesn't, and then it goes way wrong. So Chat GPT was doing a great job of answering all my questions about CO2 as a refrigerant, but then I saw something that didn't make sense, and then from that point forward, it went down a rabbit hole of wrong answers. So it's constantly learning, but it also gets a lot of things wrong. So just be cautious about that. All right, let's see what else we got going on here. Can a mega ohm meter test damage a motor that's too old? That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. Maybe someone in the chat can answer that. I mean, I guess in a weird way, is it possible to put too much voltage and damage the windings? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if it's gonna damage a motor, is that motor already on the way out? That's a really good question. Okay, so George Robles is saying too little current. Yeah, that's kind of my thought too. But I mean, I guess there's a weird situation. So yeah, who knows? All right, what was the name of that book? Hold on. Where is it? Oh, it's right here. It's actually sitting at my desk right here. It's called Commercial Refrigeration for Air Conditioning Technicians. This is the 4th edition from the author Dick Wers. This is a great book. It's not too thick. You just keep it in your truck, and it gives you all kinds of great information. And the other book that I showed too that y'all want to get this right here is the Design and Application Guide for Honeywell Economizer Controls. It is the technical reference manual. You may or may not be able to find a print version of this, but you can definitely download it. All right, let's see what else we got going on in here. If you use too high a voltage when megging a motor, so Jason's saying, yeah, you could damage it if you use too high of a voltage. So let's see. Double the voltage of what you're working. Yeah. And so that's what I've always done too. Whenever you're working on a motor, you double the voltage, and that's the voltage you apply to it. So I deal with a lot of 208 volt equipment. So I'm typically testing at 500 volts. So, all right, going to go get to some more questions. HVAC Life commented that they are glad. So he was responding to one of my videos that I had to do a late night service call when it was raining. And he's commenting saying that he's glad he doesn't do a lot of refrigeration work. Implying that it sucked that I was out in the rain. And that is something that you have to factor in when deciding what line of work you want to go into and even in some air conditioning situations too, you might have 24-hour service depending on the kind of customers you service, right? But doing refrigeration work, especially in restaurants, what I do, there is late night work. Now, it's not as much as like a supermarket guy might get where he's working all hours of the night, changing compressors and doing different things. For the most part, I don't do a lot of compressor changes overnight, but they do happen every couple years where we get a late night one. But I typically have 1 to 2 late night service calls a month, usually between myself, my company does, right? But I'm not getting them all because I have other technicians that are on call. But refrigeration is a business in which you're going to be busy. So you can get into a side of this industry that doesn't do those kind of calls if you need it, right? So you need to do that research and decide where you want to go. All right. Let me see through the chat, reading through. If you guys have questions or things you want me to cover, you definitely want to put it in caps lock. So, okay, cool. Reading through here. So so in a recent video, I had an energy management system that wasn't working right. It had a Siemens controller on it. It had a whole Siemens energy management system, and the controller was damaged. The customer ruined it because they got the wall wet. So in that situation, I dropped a temporary thermostat down into the return air side of the ductwork. So the question is, why do that? Why drop it down into the return air side? I kind of covered it in the video a little bit. Like, I don't want to mount it in the unit because of how hot it gets outside, and the control cabinet's probably going to exceed 130 degrees in the summertime. So the thermostat itself would just malfunction because it would get overheated. So, in a perfect world, I install it in place of the other thermostat down in the building that's mounted on the wall. But hear me out. That particular thermostat has some interesting electrical connections going to it. I didn't want to have to make anybody else work too hard. So the person that goes in to replace that thermostat and put the proper energy management system back in, if that's what the customer decides to do, I didn't want them to have to work really hard to figure out what wire went everywhere. The next thing is there's zone sensors that are somewhere in the building, who knows where. And I didn't want to have to get involved in trying to hook up a zone sensor that maybe had the wrong resistance value on it or something. Now, in that situation, that particular thermostat that I used can actually go between a 20K ohm and a 10K ohm zone sensor, so you can switch it over in there. But the whole point was, what I did was a temporary solution, and it was the best situation and the easiest to undo, was my thought process behind that. So instead of going in and removing the existing thermostat off the wall, mounting the other one, unwiring it and rewiring it, I just left the old one there because it's an automation system, and it'll just be easier for the next guy when he goes to change that thermostat and or replace the automation system to do it that way. Okay, so that was my logic behind why I dropped it down in there versus putting it back on the wall. Reading through the chat. Have I worked on a 4 seasons RTU? And if so, would I need a laptop to troubleshoot? No, I have not worked on a 4 seasons unit. Believe those are giant dehumidification units, are they not? I have not worked on one though. So let me see. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. 7K for that Megger, Jason. That's pretty expensive, man. Let's see. Reading through the chat right now. What I just saw something about Chat GPT. I don't know if I printed that one or not. You can feed Chat GPT into info to digest too. Yes, you can. But so for instance, I went to Chat GPT and I asked who the creator of HVACR videos was, and it got it completely wrong. And then I informed Chat GPT that I was the creator of HVACR videos, and it said great, and it gave me a compliment on the kind of work that I do and the feedback that I get from my commenters. But then I went back a couple days later and asked it the same question, and it got it wrong again. So clearly it has some sort of an algorithm about learning that it's not just going to be like Wikipedia where anybody can feed information into it. It's probably got some kind of fact checking setup going on. So you don't just give it. There's another thing about Chat GPT too, is you have to know how to ask it the questions. And oftentimes you can ask it the question several different ways and get different answers each time. So it's not like going to take over the world today. Okay. It's there's certainly a way to use it, and it's good at some things and then other things it's not. On another note, I heard that there's a huge update coming and it's going to be like revolutionary for Chat GPT. Let's see if that makes it any better. So reading through the chat right now. Can I cover the topic of 240 volt line break using T-stat wire? Yeah, 100%. That's actually the next thing. So in a recent video I had actually, it was a video. That was filmed all the way back last year. I forgot about it. I've been going through my hard drive and like finding videos. So what actually happens, I think I covered this recently, but what happens is oftentimes I'll film very similar videos like back to back. And maybe I posted probably a bunch of air conditioning videos, and I was like, all right, I need something different. So I stopped posting air conditioning videos and started posting some more refrigeration ones. And then I just sat on the footage and then I forgot about it. So I was going through my hard drive of wonders and I was like, oh, this is an interesting video. And then I watched it and then I saw that thermostat thing and then it all came back to me. So what happened was I went out to a customer, and actually I think I'm going to do part 2 of that this week probably, where I go back and fix the other 2 ACs. There was actually quite a few things going on with those too. One of the ACs had a Linux Prodigy 1 board, and it had a 5 amp fuse, and it's only supposed to have a 2 amp control fuse. And I'm like, what the heck? Some people's kids, right? They just blow me away. But anyways, while I was diagnosing that, I was like going through things, and you guys saw I did like a YouTube short on it, and I put it in the video. I found that they were powering the smoke detector down in the building. So that was the smoke detector being powered by that thermostat wire. They were powering the smoke detector. Well, I shouldn't even say powering. I don't think they were powering it. I think what they were doing was they were running the control contacts down from the 240 volt side of the transformer. Now, first and foremost, that particular Linux unit is a Prodigy unit. And I showed it in the video right on the board. It clearly tells you how to wire the smoke detectors. It has a R, a common, and then an input wire. And so what you do is you power it from the R, and you run the R wire down through the smoke detector, and you run it into a contact. Now, remember, smoke detectors or duct detectors, it's a bunch of dry contacts in there, okay? So when you power the duct detector, the normally open and normally closed contacts, they're not energized, okay? So you actually have to run jumper wires from the R over to the common of one of the contacts, and then you do whatever you need to do with the other side of that contact, the normally closed or normally open, and you perform functions within the smoke detector. So in this situation, they could have wired the duct detectors in simply through using the logic inside the board and wiring it to the smoke detector feature, but they didn't. So I was in my head thinking, okay, here's what they're doing. Old school mentality would just break the transformer wires, the 24 volt wire coming out of the transformer. They would run it through the smoke detector, through the contacts, and then come back up. and feed it to the thermostat or to the unit and then break it that way. Because the theory was on older units, they didn't have smoke detector inputs or emergency stop features. So in this situation, someone made a mistake and they grabbed one side of the 240 volt line going into the transformer and ran it through the thermostat wire. Okay. So I mentioned in the video that they shouldn't be powering 240 volts through an 18 gauge thermostat wire. I realize that in some weird situations, 18 gauge wire will be okay for 240 volts if you don't have a high current. I do realize that. But what I think people aren't realizing what was going on there, the insulation on that 18 gauge thermostat wire is not rated for 240 volts. That insulation on especially on old thermostat wires, that insulation gets hard and brittle and it cracks oftentimes. That is not rated for 240 volt. Okay. So in that situation, also, thermostat wire typically is not ran in conduit. Sometimes they do. In this situation, it was not ran in conduit. Okay. So then another person brought up a great point. They said, hey, well, they were only breaking one side of that 208 volt circuit. So technically, it was only 120 volts going through that thermostat wire. But do you remember I said they did it to both transformers? There was a control transformer and a contactor transformer. Depending on how the manufacturer Lennox wired that unit up, I bet you anything, the phases are switching between the two transformers. I bet you they are. I bet you anything to reduce the load so that way they don't have both transformers connecting to line A for one leg and line B for the other leg. I bet you on one transformer they do line A and line C, and then on the other one they do line B and line C or something like that. So there is the possibility that they actually were running 240 volts through that thermostat wire, but just 120 on each leg. So I realize that 18 gauge potentially can handle 240 volt current, but that insulation on that 18 gauge thermostat wire could not handle 240 volt current. That was a very dangerous situation. Someone could have gotten hurt. The next thing to address is that typically, right, and this is the thing that we all need to remember, we always assume that everything's okay. We run across a thermostat wire and we're like, oh, it's just a thermostat wire. I don't mind dealing with it live. I'll strip wires all the time, doing it live on thermostat wire. I do it often, right? But in this situation, if someone went to work on that duct detector and didn't know and just stuck their hands in there, they could have got hit with 240 volts. In most situations, you'll probably survive that, but in some you might not. And is that a risk that you're willing to take? This clearly was a dummy installer. I kind of felt bad about some of the things that I said in the video because it made me feel bad calling him the stupidest person in the world. But I mean, that aggravated me, right? That was irritating to see that kind of work being done and to know that someone potentially could have gotten hurt, right? That's kind of scary. So that was completely incorrect on their part. So let me cross those ones off the list. Another thing too, you know, people didn't understand is that in some situations, depending on the size of the equipment, you might call for a return and supply duct detector. Okay, so I didn't mean that there shouldn't be two duct detectors on that unit. There actually should, because it's a 15-ton unit. I think there should be a return and a supply detector. And I technically did disconnect the second detector because I told the customer that they needed to get someone, the fire alarm company, involved, and they never got them involved. But yeah, so they are running with one duct detector on that unit. So let's go through the chat. Again, I see a lot of stuff going by in the chat. On the Siemens EMS call, what happens if a two-speed tap get energized? Two speed taps get energized the same time, Gabe. So in that video, that's a 3-phase package unit, and that particular blower motor, you know, that blower motor might have been single phase, but it's not a 2-speed. So yeah, that wasn't a 2-speed unit. So, all right, reading through here right now. Reading through the chat. Did I figure out my home central air solution ductless mini split in the studio room? No, I have not. It is time to get going back on that again. I kind of took a break on everything because I needed to focus on some other priorities, but I want to get it done before the summer, so I'm not climbing around in my attic. It's already getting in the middle of the day. It's hitting about 80 degrees in my attic, so I want to get that work done. I'm in the process, for those that don't know, on doing a replacement on my home HVAC system. But something to understand, right? And I know people want to see the outcome and they want to see the results, but you have to remember something. It's my own home. I am not in a rush to get it done. So, I very well may install and redo the ductwork and do it, but it's going to be a project that's going to go on for a while. So I'm sure it's going to be a series that I'm going to keep posting about. So yeah, anyways, but nope, I haven't done anything yet. I'm still dying in my office right now. So, cause it's hot. All right. Read through that. What's the name of that video? Sure, I don't know, man. So the last 2 videos that I did, the AC is heating and cooling at the same time. That's the one where I dropped a thermostat down in the ductwork. And then I can't believe they wired the smoke detector that way, as the one with the duct detector. So those are my 2 recent full-length videos. And I did find humor in the comments that someone said, imagine if the smoke detector caused a fire in the building. That'd be pretty funny when you think about that. Wouldn't it be ironic? The smoke detector that's supposed to shut down the air conditioner causes a fire because some dumb wired 240 volt to the contacts. So, so in the video, I did like a video too where I changed a contactor. Actually, it was in that recent video with the duct detector down in the ducts. I changed a contactor and I showed my little tip where on the Mars contactors, you can actually pull the lug screw out and pull the lug off, and it'll accept normal screws. Because there's 2 types of contactors in the kind of work that I do. There's a contactor that has lugs and there's a contactor that has screws. If any of you ever worked on Trane Voyager equipment, the package units, you'll know that Trane has their OEM contactors that have screw connections on one side and lugs on the other. And I know there's some people out there, there's actually a lot of people that said, why even bother doing what I did? Why not just put a lug in there and cut off the little ends and shove the wires into the lugs? Well, here's why. Sometimes in some situations, there'll be multiple wires going to places and you don't have enough room on the contactor. I prefer to put back in is what's there. Sometimes wires are too short. Sometimes you don't want to be cutting an inch off of the wire, a half inch off the wire, because they didn't leave you enough room. They didn't leave you enough slack. And then you'd have to undo 50 billion zip ties and stretch the wire. So I prefer to go back in with what's there. Now, I love putting OEM parts in, but there's also things that I realize you don't necessarily have to use OEM for. As long as you match up the specs on a contactor and it's rated for the voltage and the coil voltage and the duty cycle of that particular equipment, there's no reason to go in with an OEM one sometimes that are oftentimes ridiculously overpriced when I can just make the contactor with a normal off-the-shelf contactor. But understand that there's differences in certain types of contactors. You have to know in the field when you can look at it and say, this is a high quality contactor. I'm going to try to go back with the OEM because it's made with better parts, or is it just a cheap junk contactor anyways from the manufacturer? I might as well just make it and use what I have on my truck and not have to spend 2 hours going to drive to get the parts. What about putting in flag connectors with those contactors? I still don't have a flag connector tool, so I still have not bought that. I keep thinking about buying one, and I just haven't done it. Hey, while I got everybody here right now, if you guys are interested, check out my website, hvacrvideos.com. We have merchandise available on there, hats and t-shirts. I'm actually wearing the big picture flag shirt. So I'm sorry, this isn't the big picture. This is the HVACR videos one, and then it has a flag on the sleeve. Check them out. They're available on the website, hvacrvideos.com, if you guys are interested in helping support the channel. Let's see. Exhaust my computer heat outside. How many watts and BTUs was it? Dale Mar, I don't even remember, dude. Honestly, I think it was 2,000 BTUs of heat was added by my computer. Okay, so Dale, here's the deal. If I exhaust my computer outside, we have to bring in makeup air. So if I have a fan pulling out 400 CFMs of air, 300, whatever it is, 100 CFMs of air, something's got to give, and that's going to put a negative air pressure on my house. So if I do that, then I have to make up for that air that I'm exhausting out, and that's adding more air into the building. So it's definitely something that I have considered, but it's not as simple as that. Now I've thought, a lot of people have said, well, because my computer is water cooled, right? It's running glycol through it and all that fancy stuff. But, yeah, put the glycol heat exchanger outside and fans on it and exhaust the heat out there. And then, there's all kinds of things you can do, but I don't want to get that difficult. I mean, it's not going to be that big of a deal if I just add a mini split to my office or something like that. So I'm still evaluating the best way to go about this. So what's the best way to be successful in HVAC as a high school student? Nathan, dude, I'm super stoked that you're interested in HVAC as a high school student. Okay. You are going to hit the ground running if you start studying now. Depending on where you're at, there's going to be all kinds of great training resources. Of course, you can go to trade school, local community colleges. I encourage you not to spend a crap ton of money on a trade school. Okay. So if you're still in high school, I want you to get a proper education and I want you to get trained. But a couple things you need to understand. Number one, you are not going to learn everything in trade school. Of course, trade school is a must. You're going to learn the basics, but you're still not going to learn everything. I don't want you to go out and spend $35,000, $40,000 on an education and then realize that you still are going to start at a company as an apprentice. Okay. Just because you went through trade school doesn't mean that you're now going to make $100,000 a year. You're not. You're going to start from the bottom and you're going to work your way up. I prefer that people go through community college programs or something like that, that they're not blowing their wad and just spending all their money on. Now, of course, there's those diamonds in the rough, private trade schools that are expensive, that'll give you a good high quality education. Unfortunately, I have to say, as far as the private schools go, there's more private schools that suck than there is private schools that are great. That's the unfortunate truth. And in the chat, let me ask the chat right now. For the HVAC technicians in the chat right now, do you think that there's more good private schools? Or just answer my question. You get what I'm going. I'm having a hard time getting that question out. But I mean, do you guys agree that there's a good majority of the private schools that suck? So I'd hate for you to go spend all your money, Nathan, on a trade school and then be in debt to get started in HVAC. There's no reason for that. Okay. Now, if you go to a community college, oftentimes, depending on where you're at, sometimes that can be subsidized education. There's also training resources that are local. And then also another thing too, is sometimes companies are willing to pay for education too, So, but as a high school student, do some research. You're going to hit the ground running because you're going to have years over most of the other people. Okay. So it's really awesome that you're interested. On the job training is good. Okay. But I still think that there is some value in a trade school. The reason why I want kids to get education from school is because they get the fundamentals that I cannot teach. I am not a person that's going to teach electrical theory. I am not a person that's going to teach refrigeration theory. I can teach them the know-hows and the real world stuff, but I cannot teach electrical theory. So that's what trade school or a proper education is for. That's where you learn that kind of stuff. Reading through in here. All right. You got paid to learn HVACR, learned it all through on-the-job training, and now you're your company's lead service tech. And that's great. Okay, that is great. AB Refrigeration, Heating, and Cooling says, why do supermarkets put ice under the fish in a refrigerated display case? Simply for presentation. That is absolutely the reason why they do it. Because underneath that ice is a stainless steel metal plate, okay? And the ice is just something that looks good. The fish looks good on top of it. It also helps with the cooling because those display cases are not the greatest, especially if people leave doors open on them and stuff. We're talking about the deli style fish cases and different things. So yeah, they use crushed ice or flaked ice simply as it just looks nice and the appearance looks better. Reading through here right now. You only need like 100 CFMs that will be made up through the other house's exhaust fan leakage. Yeah, no, see, Dale, that's not how my house is going to work. I'm not going to accept that we're going to be pulling through other exhaust fans because the exhaust fans in my house are all going to have backdraft dampers on them. So you're not going to be able to pull air in through the exhaust fans. They're only going to be able to push air out. I am going to be bringing fresh air into my house for sure, but I don't really want to have in my head right now. Again, this may change as things go on, but I typically don't want to have some sort of an exhaust fan in my office or something like that. I'd rather have, well, we'll see. Again, that's just my initial thought, but feel free to shoot me an email if you want to talk more about it. So, All right, reading through the chat. Have I seen Honeywell thermostats powering heating and cooling at the same time? Yeah, I mean, you know, it happens for sure. All brands can do it. Just means something's wrong. Do I think the HVACR trade is underpaid? Dave M. Well, I don't know if it's underpaid. I mean, I try to be as fair as possible for my service technicians and make sure that they're compensated. Of course, you know, I want to make more money as a business, you know. So I guess in a way, I'd say that, you know, there's certain people that are underpaid in the HVACR industry for sure. You know, and companies, you know, I wish that companies could be charging more money. You know, if you're in a saturated marketplace, it's hard to raise your rates because there's always going to be someone that's going to be cheaper than you. So those are things you have to consider. So I guess, yes, I do think HVACR techs, for the most part, are underpaid. But there's also people that are paid very well, you know, so let's see, dedicated intake and exhaust for the CPU. Definitely things I can do, you know, but I just don't really want to be cutting a bunch of holes in my wall if I don't have to. I'm not going to live in this house forever, so I don't want to have to spend a bunch of money to have to patch things up when I leave out of the house. So, all right, I'm going to read through a couple more questions. Why not? Oh, okay. So in a exhaust fan video that I did about a week and a half ago, I installed a European style disconnect switch that had a dial knob on it that you turned to turn off the power. And the question was, why in the heck did I not use a standard lever style disconnect switch that uses knives, right? So if you have a standard disconnect switch, you typically have a lever that goes in and it closes like this, okay? A lever, it's a handle that you pull and it's a disconnect and it opens and closes. They tend to be bigger. They accept fuses sometimes. Sometimes they can be non-fused. So why didn't I use one of those instead of the dial? Simply because of the environment that it was installed in. That particular environment has a lot of blowing sand. And I used a NEMA 4X enclosure that is going to prevent that sand from getting into the disconnect switch. Now, nothing's going to prevent it completely, but that is the main reason why I tried that switch. So that was an experiment because I typically don't use those style switches, but I did like it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and address the comments because the number one question that I got on that video when I installed that lever style disconnect switch was, why in the heck did I bring power into the top of the switch and why didn't I bring it to the bottom? It was simply a mistake on my part, okay, but it's going to be fine. I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to go and correct it. It was a mistake on my part, and I honestly didn't even think about it. And I can put you in my headspace at the time. We're in the middle between rainstorms. I drove up there when it wasn't raining, but it was supposed to be raining that day. So in my mind, I was already kind of like, I need to get this done. I hooked up the power to the top like the old one and then pulled the power from the bottom, you know, like that one. To answer the questions too, I got a bunch of people saying that I wired the switch wrong, that the power should have been coming in the top of the switch, the line voltage, and then the load voltage should have been coming out the bottom of the switch. It was. People just got mistaken because the conduits were flipped. The conduit for the motor was coming in the top of the disconnect housing, but the wires were running to the bottom. And the conduit for the line voltage was coming in the bottom and running to the top. So it was wired as far as the switch goes the right way. But simply, if I would have just extended the seal tight conduit coming out of the motor, extended the wires, I could have brought that down to the bottom and prevented a future problem of potential moisture getting in through the top of that switch. Yes, I could have done that. That was just a mistake on my part, but I'm not worried about it and I'm not going to go correct it. It's fine. Okay. The main reason why the previous switch had failed, and I mentioned, and a lot of people were confused because I mentioned that the conduit broke and the disconnect filled with water, right? So why in the heck would I drill the new one in the same way? Well, the reason why the disconnect previous had broken was because it had a 3/4 inch knockout with a 1/2 inch seal tight fitting going in the top. So oftentimes on some of our electrical enclosures, they'll have pre-knockouts. You'll have a 1 inch knockout, you'll have a 3/4 inch knockout, and a 1/2 inch knockout. And you'll just typically hit them out with a screwdriver or something like that. So what had happened on the old one was the 3/4 inch knockout got weak and it broke. So the 1/2 inch conduit fell down into the disconnect switch. So on the new one, I actually had to drill a 1/2 inch hole. So we're definitely not going to have that problem on the new one. And I made sure that I installed a gasket. Now, in that situation too, I acknowledge the fact that at a minimum, probably what I should have done was sealed that with silicone. That probably would have been a good idea. And I may even do that next time I'm up there, just put a dab of silicone around it and be done with it. But I'm not too worried about that switch filling up with water. I think it's going to be fine. So why do Daikin RTUs have so many screws? I mean, I don't know. I don't know why half of them. So if your gasket is good, it won't leak. And that was basically the reason, you know, Jason, that I kind of went, I'm not too worried about that switch filling up with water. And again, the simple fact that the hole's the right size, it's tight. I really don't think we're going to have an issue. It's not like it's just sitting there underwater all the time. So what is the purpose to bring the power in the bottom and not the top? And I kind of addressed that, Scott. So I think I answered that one. So it just basically, that's how the old one was. The power was coming in the bottom, but I put the wires up on the top of the switch, and then the motor was coming in the top, and I put the wires on the bottom of the switch. So will I ever move out of California? I would love to move out of California. Unfortunately, I have 3 blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls that live in my house that would never leave the sunny state of California. My 2 daughters and my wife all love the sun and love the beach and love the weather of California. In my perfect world, I would move to Montana, where I don't even see my neighbors and I have to drive to see my neighbors. Like, that would be my ideal, or Wyoming or something crazy where I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I always tell my family, so I'm going to ask the chat right now. Okay. So some people in the chat might know this, right? Some new people in here don't. So in another life, right? In another life, what do you think my ideal dream job would be? In another life, in another world, what would I do for a career? Okay, go ahead. The people that do know it too, you guys can answer it, but I'm curious to see what other people's answers are. What you guys think I would be doing as a career in another life, and then I'll continue on with my story. So officer, pineapple ranger, dental floss tycoon. Jason says he's a SoCal guy, but glad he doesn't live in that dump of a state. Yeah, it's definitely interesting here. So I'm reading through there. Buy a tanning bed. Let's read through it. And I'm reading through right now, seeing what everybody working on my Mustang. I'd be a teacher, a farmer. Yep, a pimp, a carpenter, an auto tech. 100%, guys, I would be a park ranger. And I'm not talking about the park ranger that works at your county park that just makes sure kids aren't tagging on the walls and stuff. I'm talking a park ranger out in the middle of Yellowstone, out in the middle of Yosemite. Now, of course, I would never want to change my family. I would never wish that on anything, but just in another life, I would be a park ranger because I'm actually an outdoors person. Love camping, hiking, being out in the middle of nowhere, having to figure things out. That's like a hobby of mine. And unfortunately, with the chaos of getting older and older, my passions and my hobbies, I have not been actively participating in them as much as I like to do. So I used to go camping and backpacking quite often. Haven't done it in quite a few years, and I need to get back into it for sure, because that's where my happy place is. But so, yeah, I would love to move out of California to a place that actually has real seasons. My wife's family, her brother lives in North Carolina, and every time I've gone to visit, I absolutely love North Carolina. Her mom lives in Virginia. It's gorgeous there. Like, I love weather. Her dad lives up in Northern California. I mean, the difference between Northern California and Southern California is huge too. Northern California is a great place. They have great weather up there. It's nice up there too. So yeah, I would love to get out of California if I could, but I'm not going to. So, all right. So I already answered that question. Okay. Corby asked a great question. So he's talking about a video from a long time ago where I had to go out in the middle of the night because a compressor was going off on thermal overload, and I had a magnetic tool on the top cooling the compressor down. And he just asked a simple question. And these questions are great. Clearly, I don't think he's an HVACR service technician, but if he is, that's fine. But if not, I'm totally open to questions from people that are not HVAC also. Okay. But his question is, in that compressor, I said it went off on thermal overload. So what is thermal overload? Thermal overload is a protection inside the compressor to protect its own motor. If the motor ever gets into a situation where it's overheating, it has a thermal disk inside the compressor that's actually going to actively break 2 lines of power to prevent that compressor from continuing to run. Okay. So in that situation, he's asking, is a thermal overload the same as a high pressure cutout safety switch? And no, it is not. A high pressure safety switch is in the system to protect the system from an overpressurization of the system. So let's say if it's running without a condenser fan motor, that head pressure in the system is going to keep climbing and climbing and climbing as the heat builds until that compressor catastrophically implodes on itself. Okay. So a thermal overload is something different, and they should be used in conjunction. They should not be used individually to protect a system. Compressors that are 3-phase should all have thermal overloads, and they should all have high pressure safety cutout switches. So, okay, cool. So that was a great question, Corby, and I encourage those kind of questions. Okay. Dan asked if the high voltage going to the smoke detector would have destroyed it. No, Dan. In the smoke detector video that had 240 volts going to it down the thermostat wire, what I think they were doing, I do not think they were powering the smoke detector with that 240 volts. I think what they were doing was the person who installed the smoke detectors, or at least tied them into the air conditioners, mistakenly tied it into the high voltage lines. They meant to tie it into the low voltage and break the low voltage transformer. So the theory was they were going to take the 24 volt hot leg, run it down to a contact in the smoke detector, that if the smoke detector tripped, it would no longer let that power from the 24 volts go through the smoke detector, then back up to the AC. And so it would kill the AC and turn it off. That was what they were trying to do, but instead they did that with the high voltage wires. All right. Colin asked why there were lights on the side of those HVAC units. Those are courtesy lights or utility lights that are inside, or, you know, installed from installation like day one. Honestly, those are dumb. They don't really light anything up. Okay. I think those lights are useless. That's what we have flashlights and headlights for, that are much more convenient to be working on the equipment. Those convenience lights, the only thing convenience lights will do for you is if they have a power switch down in the roof hatch. It is nice when you're going up in the middle of the night to turn on that power switch and have maybe 3 light sources on the roof that helps to illuminate the roof as you're walking up there. But as far as working on the units, you got to use your own flashlights or your own headlights when you're actually looking into them, trying to figure things out. So, what's the difference between an ERV and an HRV with one of the exhaust ducts going to my computer? What about doing a whole home ERV, HRV with one of the exhaust ducts going to my computer? I see what you're saying. Hey, that's always a possibility, but you know, I don't know. I'd have to think about that one. What's the difference between a thermal overload and an internal bypass? A thermal overload is there to protect the windings of the motor, okay? And an internal bypass is there to protect the compressor itself from overpressurizing. If the compression ratio gets to be too high, the difference between the high side and the low side of that compressor gets to be too big of a difference, then the floating seal in that compressor will, if I remember it right, or no, actually, no, I'm gonna stop talking about the Copeland compressors, because there's 2 different pressure reliefs. There's a floating seal, and then there's a pressure relief. And I don't know the difference between the two, the names. I can understand how they work, but essentially the internal bypass is there to protect the compressor from overpressurizing, basically, and the thermal overload's there to protect the motor. So oftentimes what they will do, again, this is where we'd have to get Trevor Matthews on here, even Ty Branham, and they'd explain it too. But in some situations, they will blast discharge gas on the thermal overload too, if I remember right, in the Copeland compressors. Yeah, I got to be careful because I'm going down a rabbit hole and I might be spewing some incorrect information. So is ghost voltage more common in transformer current? Does it happen more in low voltage? That's a good question, Gabe, and I really don't know the answer to that, bud. Looks like a duck, sounds like a duck kind of thing. 100%. All right. Answered that question. And let's go ahead and go through. Ludwig had made a comment on my recent video with the smoke detector, to said, never touch a running system. So that's impossible as a service technician. It is absolutely impossible. And I do have to say that while I appreciate safety rules and OSHA rules, honestly, there's some regulations and rules that are just not practical when it comes to being a service technician. Okay. So we have to work on running and operating equipment. The key is to understand what you're working on and know what to touch and what not to touch. Obviously, be very careful in the higher voltage, but equally, you can get hurt in lower voltage equipment too. Okay. So if I'm working on anything over 480 volts, which I never have worked on anything over that, yeah, you definitely, I mean, even with 480 volts, I think you're technically supposed to have beekeeper suits on. But yeah, anything over 480 is when you really need to start being nervous. Okay. But even 480, there's no joking around with that. But like I said, I mean, you can get killed by 120 volts. Hell, you can probably get killed by 24 volts if the current's high enough. But, yeah, just be cautious. Okay. But yeah, you have to understand what you're working on and you have to be able to work on operating equipment. You just have to know, okay, you can't be inexperienced as a layman going up to your package unit on the roof and pushing and pulling because you're likely to get electrocuted for sure. So, all right. Yeah, don't check voltage like the old school guys. Lick their fingers and touch it real quick. No, definitely no. Do I ever come across VRV or VRF systems? Michael Franks. No, I don't. I don't work on anything like that. I know all that stuff is coming to the restaurant industry, but it's not there yet. So I haven't had to deal with any of that. So, all right. What tablet do I use? I use Samsung branded tablets. As far as the number goes, I know it's last year's model. It's a Samsung. I have an Ultra tablet and then I have a smaller tablet, but they're both the newest Samsung Galaxy tablets, S8 or something like that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. Old Shep asked why I don't write down all the work performed on the side of the units, like on the back of the panels and stuff. So that used to be something that we did all the time. And actually, if you watching in some of my videos, you'll find that if I open up electrical panels to refrigeration racks, there'll be a book written on the wall of all the service history and different things. That was something that we did very commonly in the past. But now we have digital technology. And my invoicing software, which currently right now I use Intuit Field Service Management, and I have all my equipment history, service data, and everything in my software. So I can see it, I can pull it up, and all my employees can see it and pull it up too. The thing about writing on the back of the panels, while that worked for a good majority of the career, you start filling those panels up and then you got to erase them or paint over them or something and then start over again. So digital is where we store all of our equipment history now. Josh Levy had commented that, you know, there's lots of conversations going on in the video where I found the 240 volts going to the duct detector. And Josh had said that, you know, he finds that a lot of smoke detector systems are miswired. And I 100% agree with that. I have rewired entire smoke detector systems that okay, the fact in this last video, I said that there was 240 volts going to the smoke detector control wiring, right? And I said that building been there for at least 10 years. Yeah, 100%. That building been there for at least 10 years. That's not uncommon. I find stuff like that all the time in restaurants where you think that when the fire marshal, because we have routine inspections by the fire marshal and he comes through and he's supposed to be testing the fire systems and the duct detectors and all that stuff, you think you would catch that in all the routine inspections that he does on a regular basis. Nope, they don't. They don't catch half that stuff. And it baffles me. And it makes you realize that half the stuff they're doing when they do their routine inspections are a bunch of BS. Because I can tell you, it's been a ridiculous amount of restaurants that I've found that their entire duct detector systems were never wired right from the beginning. They would never have worked right. They've never been tested half the time. And I mean, these restaurants get routine inspections like annually. They have fire marshals come through and they have second party or third party companies come through and audit their systems. And I still find stuff completely incorrect. Like it just blows my mind. All right. Do I ever work on any 4160 gear? 100% no. No, I have not. I don't work on anything that big. So, all right, cool. Well, it is time for me to wrap this one up. I really do appreciate you making it into the live stream. Definitely check out my website, hvacrvideos.com. Lots of great merchandise on there. If you guys are interested in purchasing any tools, definitely check out truetechtools.com. I have an offer code, big picture, one word. If you use that offer code, you get an 8% discount on most of the items that they sell on checkout. and I get a small commission from that. So it's a great way to help support the channel. Again, I really, really appreciate you guys. And I am going to cue up the outro music. And again, we will catch you guys on the next one.